Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, May 2nd, 2025, and our friends Larry Johnson and Colonel Wilkerson are back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you.
William.
Let's get started with what has happened with Mike Waltz. And when we talk about him, we may remember the importance of uh, Jake Sullivan in the administration of Joe Biden. And here is Mike Waltz, and here is what J.D. Vance said about him.
No, he is being made ambassador to the United Nations, which, of course, is a Senate-confirmed position. I think you can make a good argument that it's a promotion. But we brought Mike on to do some serious reforms of the National Security Council. He has done that. I like Mike. I think he's a great guy. He's got the trust of both me and the president. But we also thought that he'd make a better UN ambassador as we get beyond this stage of the reforms that we've made to the National Security Council. You saw the president announce that Marco Rubio is going to step in as interim leader of the National Security Council.
Yeah, is that related, Colonel? Is that related to what has happened with the case of Signal and that they were talking about Yemen and the strategy toward Yemen? What is the main reason, in your opinion?
Well, I think the incident with his having brought a reporter, particularly Jeffrey Goldberg, into a conversation like that or into a meeting like that had to have something to do with it. But I saw Vance's nose growing the whole time he was talking, like Pinocchio, lying through his teeth. What do you do with someone like Samantha Power, for example, whom Obama was fiercely angry at for Libya? He kicked her up to New York to get her out of his hair and to put her in a position that was inconsequential, really, to substantial decision making. That's exactly what he's doing with Waltz. He's sending him to an organization that Trump, by his own declarations, abhors and is thinking about withdrawing all American dues to, which will kill the UN, as Ronald Reagan found out. He's sending him to nowhere.
Larry.
Yeah, well, he's gone. When he was as the national security advisor to the president, he was essentially going to be giving direction to Marco Rubio. Now, at the United Nations, he's under the thumb of Marco Rubio. So, and Larry is exactly right. He's getting kicked upstairs. I think they wanted to get rid of him, but here was a guy that they convinced to give up his safe seat in Congress. And so, they didn't want to just throw him out to the street. And so he'll go up, he'll cool his heels in New York. He'll make some new friends up there, get some new business opportunities. And probably within a year or so, he'll be gone. However, it does create a real, to go through the Senate confirmation process. They're going to beat the hell out of the guy. I mean, the Democrats, boy, they're on their knees saying there is a God. We now have a gift that we can just blast him. He'll have to, under oath, deny that he knew Jeffrey Goldberg, which is a lie. There are other credible reports out there that he absolutely knew him, even though he's denied having any contact. And then they'll get into the particulars of a lot of various policies. So, it'll be ugly. He'll ultimately get confirmed, but Trump administration is going to get another big black eye.
If I were Elizabeth Warren or someone like that, I'd lean into the mic and I would say, "Are you going up to New York to dismantle the United Nations for your president?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Colonel, how did you find him so far in his position? Do you think he was helpful? He was somehow making barriers, obstacles for the administration in terms of the conflict in the Middle East with Ukraine and even with China?
Well, the most dramatic thing that I saw, that I'm in no position to interpret because it's a very confidential thing between the president and the national security advisor, but maybe Trump was using him. But he was between the two meetings in Muscat between Witkoff and the foreign minister of Iran, one indirect and then the other one fairly direct. He was putting out that Witkoff was on the wrong sheet of music, that Witkoff was wrong, that Iran had to completely disarm, absolutely disarm. And Witkoff, of course, was not saying that to the Iranians because they would have walked away had he been saying that. At either meeting, they would have just left, walked away. So I either have to think that Trump and he were trying to coordinate some inartful pressure on the negotiations with regard to Iran, or the National Security Advisor was just off the reservation. I don't know which, but it didn't turn out very well in terms of the way he looked in his coordination with the president.
Yeah. Larry, your take.
With respect to?
With respect to how helpful he was for Donald Trump in solving the conflicts with Russia and Iran.
He was irrelevant. I mean, he solved nothing. He was, I think the better question to ask, who's going to replace him? So Marco Rubio, Marco Rubio's juggling a lot of balls in the air. Okay, they're gonna. Well, he's actually trying out for Cirque du Soleil. They're going to put him on stage in Las Vegas. There was rumor yesterday that maybe Witkoff is going to be named the National Security Advisor, which would be another terrible choice. Witkoff seems like a nice man, but has absolutely no clue about the combination of intelligence and defense and all the elements that go up to make U.S. national security. Then Michael Anton, he's a diehard Zionist. He's currently on there. He's rumored as one possibility. Someone even suggested Keith Kellogg. I mean, I don't even think Trump's that stupid, but hey, we could let's find out. The point is, I think a lot of this chaos contributed to the cancellation of the negotiations with Iran, which are supposed to take place on Saturday.
Yeah.
But that's not it alone. There's a strong Zionist component in the Trump national security team. Ironically, most of whom are not Jewish, that want to go to war with Iran. And from what I'm seeing, it looks like I think they're going to prevail. That Witkoff's efforts to negotiate a deal are going to completely collapse. But it could be what we're seeing with Trump and, like this rare earth mineral deal he supposedly got cut with Ukraine. He talks a big game, lays out this high level marker, and then, agrees to something that's completely not what he claimed it was, but he'll still insist that it's, the best and we're going to get money out of it. He lies about it. So maybe that's what his plan is with Iran. But this, waltz is like putting your hand in a bucket of water and pulling it out. Nothing there. Maybe a few ripples, but he'll be consigned to the pages of history as an irrelevancy.
Nima, I even heard one rumor yesterday, as Eric was saying, that the rumors are rampant, but that Rubio was going to be National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, a feat only accomplished by Henry Kissinger in our history, and not a feat that anyone in the Congress, at least at that time, would ever repeat, because that's ridiculous, having a National Security Advisor and a Secretary of State with the same hat. Just ridiculous. But that's the kind of rumors that are going around.
But Colonel Rubio, so far, he didn't show so much talent in his position to be promoted.
Well, he showed some sucking up talent in that cabinet meeting.
Guys, look at Nima here being the diplomat.
Colonel, do you feel that Larry mentioned Steve Witkoff? We know that the way to destroy Steve Witkoff and what he's doing right now is to put him in a position like the position of Mike Waltz. They're going to destroy him. But do you feel that this position for Donald Trump is the same as it was for Joe Biden or no matter who's going to be in this position, Donald Trump would decide about everything and would influence everything?
I think we've seen from his first time in the presidency, and what little we have of evidence this time, not much has changed, that what I said, 6 weeks ago, or maybe right after inauguration, that I didn't think any of his cabinet officers would last a year. I stand by that. I don't think they will. But that's part of Trump's character, I think. He does not like people sharing with him in any way, fashion, or form. That was what I was really curious about with Rubio's cabinet performance, because though Rubio went to great pains to kiss his rear end every other parenthetical remark Rubio made, still he took too long and he bragged too much. Look at Trump's face the whole time that Rubio is talking. If you can get the video where you see the thing right focused on both of those members. Rubio isn't long for this world either, as far as I'm concerned. You don't contest with Trump. You don't take anything away from the king. If you take anything away from the king as one of his courtiers, you are going, and you're going fast. Maybe not as fast as I thought, maybe not 9 to 10 months, but I think we'll have a whole new cabinet after a year.
Larry, if that's the case, do you think the way that the people are talking about that this administration is not helping Donald Trump in his sort of objectives? If he's that much powerful in his administration, why he's not capable to get something in Ukraine, to get something with Iran?
Donald Trump's not helping Donald Trump. I mean, let's be clear about that. He did another post on social media last night on True Social about the fact that the United States won World War II. We were the victors. It was the biggest load of bullshit you've ever seen. And yet he believes this. He genuinely believes this nonsense. To be that out of touch with reality is alarming. And he does not. Some people imagine that he's like a 5-dimensional chess player. God, he can barely put the checker pieces on the board. And I really had hopes that sort of his trials and tribulations of the last 4 years would have taught him something, and would have given him an element both of some humility and a realization, hey, I'm mortal. I'm not going to live forever. And let's leave a legacy. Instead, he's just, he's cocking it all up. For example, pretending to be a mediator between Ukraine and Russia when the United States is the major instigator of that war. Were it not for the United States, that war would not be happening. And, I've, as I said on some other recent podcasts, when I went back and looked at how the Ukrainian army grew under the presidencies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump, it was Donald Trump where the combined military force of Ukraine went from 320,000, both active duty and reserve, to 1.2 million. Donald Trump did that, and it was a consequence of the NATO and U.S. EUCOM military exercises. It was under Donald Trump's first term as president that the military exercises started including anti-submarine warfare and amphibious warfare. We had Marines in the Black Sea and landing craft landing on the shores of Ukraine. What Russia's sitting there looking, oh yeah, this is just a benign exercise? Nonsense. And then September 2020, the Trump's Department of Defense thought it was a good idea to fly B-52s along the Crimea coast. I mean, what the hell? And then here's Trump pretending like he's, Butterfly McQueen from Gone with the Wind. I don't know nothing about birthing no babies, Miss Scarlet. I don't know nothing about that war in Ukraine. I mean, it's dangerous. It's absurd. Sorry, I'm mad at you now, Nimi. You got me on this rant.
And just to reinforce what Larry just said, I was watching his denunciation, very powerful denunciation of the Iraq War, the 2003 Iraq War, again last night. And I'm thinking the whole time about what he's doing right now, not only in support of the genocide in the Levant that Israel's created, and now bombing the hell out of Syria even more than it was before, but he's also bombing the bejesus out of those poor people in Yemen.
Yeah.
This is a guy who says that was the greatest strategic era in U.S. history. Well, compound it, please, Mr. President.
Yeah. And in fact, just try to figure out the cost, because they claim that they've flown 1,000 sorties. Now, if you assume that each sortie is dropping 2 bombs, so that's 2,000 bombs. And what's the cost per bomb? And then on top of that, they've lost 2 F-18s. The other one they dropped in the drink and sunk. So that's 140 million right there. And then 7 drones shot down in 7 weeks, which is 35 million a pop. So already they've lost U.S. military equipment worth almost $500 million in 7 weeks. That's like a drunken sailor spending all of his money on Liberty in Manila in the old days.
And Lima, I looked yesterday because Judge Napolitano asked me the question. I wanted to make sure that what I had said to him was reasonably accurate. So I went and did a detailed look at commercial shipping through the Red Sea. And while I said it didn't seem to me like much was going through, therefore the operation was not being very successful, there is some going through. It's very reduced, but it is going through. But here's the kicker. The people who really want to ship, the people who are reputable shippers, in other words, are faced with enormous insurance costs should they decide to ship. So those costs are offset the cost of going around the Cape. So they're going around the Cape. They're not going through the Red Sea. So your legitimate shippers, your reputable shippers, if you will, are not going through the Red Sea and haven't been for months. So how successful is this operation? And the people going through are the kind of people who are going to risk it because their cargo is either illicit or they're, fly by the shoe crowd. They're the only ones going through the Red Sea. So this operation has not only, Larry's absolutely right, it's cost billions of dollars. It's killing innocent civilians, principally with the bombs that are being dropped, and it's not accomplishing the mission. Yeah. So the question becomes, why the hell are we still doing it?
Yeah, I mean, because the challenge, most people, and actually I saw this even when I was working, some military exercises among military personnel. The assumption is the United States has this magical ability to locate ships at sea. It's hard to do. It ain't easy, even with all of our advanced ISR. And that's really one of the reasons that we haven't lost an aircraft carrier yet in the Red Sea, simply because the Houthis don't have the ISR capabilities to pinpoint a ship and keep it fixated so that they can hit it. It's constant moving target. So, that's problem number one. But then the reverse side of that is, similarly, the United States can't find mobile missile launchers in Yemen. That's tough to find. So, we like to pretend that we have this very expensive, technologically advanced military capabilities, but they don't always work as advertised.
And that's principally why we're losing the RQ-7s, the Reapers, because when
the MQ-9s.
Yeah, MQ-9s. Yeah, when my son flies them, and I don't even know the nomenclature. when they loiter and pinpoint the target, and then let loose a hellfire or whatever they're armed with, that's when they get shot down.
Yeah.
Colonel, when it comes to the fight with Yemen, and we've been witnessing that the Trump administration is short of targets in Yemen. They don't receive intelligence from Yemen. That's why they're attacking. I don't know. Whatever they find a gathering, they're going to attack them as though they're preparing to attack the United States to prepare for a bigger fight. But when you look yesterday, Pete Hegseth tweeted that Iran would be responsible for what's going on between the United States and Yemen, and they're going to attack Iran anywhere they feel that would be the right decision to attack them. Do you find this sort of intimidation on the part of the United States would influence Yemen? Because I don't see that Iran would immediately can do something immediately in terms of Yemen, because they're fighting. They're in a fight with the United States. And how is that? What is the strategy on the part of Pete Hegseth? He's just putting out something to say something, to not be silent, or he has some sort of strategy behind these sort of tweets that he's doing?
You know, the one tweet was particularly egregious. It reminded me of the Pete Hegseth of old. That is the Fox News man. I don't think the Houthis in any way, fashion, or form are intimidated by the United States. So that is a lie by Hegseth. But of course, he's not going to say that. And second, I don't think Iran is intimidated by his statements about the effectiveness of our bombing against the Houthis. Take that in stride, Iran, because that's what we're going to do to you. You're next, you know. Well, if I were Iran, I'd say, bring it on. If you're going to treat me the way you're treating the Houthis right now, bring it on, because I'll shoot you out of the air and I'll cause you some real pain, and I'll cause the region even more pain. So this is insane. It's like comic book characters.
Yeah.
You know, you got the guy in the one frame and he says, zap, bang, dude, I'm going to get you. And then in the next frame, it's like, zap, bang, dude, you didn't get me. This is crazy. This is Hegseth, I think. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that he's short-lived also.
Yeah. No, it's that tweet, you know, whatever the social media post was, it was so juvenile. I mean, it's just, there's no seriousness. It's like the kind of threat some guy in the locker room will make against some other guy that, you know, over some imaginary beef. And, you know, what Trump really needs, what America needs, is someone who's sitting in the Secretary of Defense chair that is the very, very last thing they want to do is go to war. Because and that's somebody that's been there and understands what the actual cost is. Because I am convinced that one of the reasons the United States has been continually embroiled in these foreign conflicts, where we go out and start them, is we don't pay a price. We don't, you know, there are a few Americans that suffer, you know, they get their legs blown off or completely disfigured or traumatic brain injury. And, you know, there is an appalling number of suicides among veterans. However, you know, that as a percentage of the U.S. population, infinitesimal. It is not a major problem for the United States. So we don't bleed over it. So hell, we make money off of it. Yeah. And to have somebody that's that cavalier as Pete Hegseth, without even, you know, having the common sense to step back and say, look at what we claimed we were going to accomplish in Yemen. Now we're seven and going 8 weeks in. We have not reopened the Red Sea. We've not established freedom of navigation. We've not shut down the Houthis' ability to carry out these attacks. And in fact, just this morning, the Houthis launched some more missiles at Israel. Yep. So, you know, but we're spending a lot of money and putting U.S. naval assets at tremendous risk.
I would just add, Nima, that we are doing tremendous damage to whatever reputation we had with regard to military prowess. Tremendous damage. And the whole world's watching. The whole world is watching. The only thing we have in our arsenal that the world is frightened of, and with good reason, is our nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's like, you know, if you've it's like you're watching a guy that looks like he's a tremendous fighter. He's very, very physically, appears to be real powerful, and all of a sudden, he gets into a fight with a dwarf, and the dwarf kicks him in the balls, and he collapses on the ground. And all of a sudden, everyone's looking around saying, "Oh, hey, Mr. Invincible ain't so invincible." And it's not just there. I mean, look at Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Look at Iraq. The United States has built up a reputation as being this big, loudmouth bully, but can't really. All we do, we can cause a lot of damage. We can kill a lot of civilians, but we don't solve the problem at all. We create them, exacerbate them, and then it's doubled down with, the United States led this effort with Ukraine and provoking Russia into this war, and Russia's beating us, defeating us across the board.
This is a dangerous signal to send because there are some enemies out there.
Yeah.
Larry, do you find Donald Trump serious about the negotiations with Iran? And because he posted yesterday on social media, he said that he's going to put sanctions on each and every country who are willing to buy oil from Iran. And we know that who's talking about. He's talking about China, because
that was China, India, and Turkey. Those are the big three. So, Trump, again, this is out of the art of the deal, making this, outrageous threat. What alarms me is the assumptions that are at the foundation of both what Trump is doing and his national security team is supporting. They genuinely believe, with respect to China, that China's going to come begging. China can't live without us. China's got to. We're their largest market. They got to have us. There's no way they could, go on living without us. And it's like, are you really that delusional?
Mm.
I mean, the Chinese vision of themselves as a people with 5,000 years of history. Okay. And they have been bullied and beat up by Westerners over time. And I think what the Chinese have learned a lesson, and I think in part, because back in 2015, when this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA agreement, was put in place, China and Russia were actually sort of lined up against Iran. And Iran, Iran didn't have many choices back then. They were embroiled in a war in Yemen. They were embroiled in a war in Syria. Their economy was in trouble. And neither China nor Russia at that point were willing to back them up. In fact, they were willing to help impose sanctions. And something happened between 2015 and 2017. I'm not precisely sure what. But sometime in late 2017, both Russia and China said, you know what, we need to start conducting military exercises, joint naval exercises with Iran. And that exercise, the planning for it took place, and it was carried out in the first week of March of 2019. And it has continued every year since. So China and Iran and Russia, they've come together in a way to, basically, I think, confront the attacks of the United States, and try to create an alternative. They don't want, none of them want to go to war with the United States, trying to avoid it at all costs possible. So coming back to your question about, is Trump serious about a deal? I don't think he is. I think he is too much a captive of the Zionist crowd. I mean, for God's sake, he just appointed a woman at the National Security Council to be in charge of the whole Middle East portfolio, who's an Israeli citizen, for Christ's sake. I mean, can you imagine? I'm going to have a Chinese citizen be the head of my Asia policy, and I'm going to have a Russian citizen who is a member of the KGB, the head of my Russian policy. Now, all those countries would be happy if that was the case. But, that's what Trump is doing. And because it's Israel, he gets away with it. So I think because of the influence of the Zionist crowd, the talks with Iran are going to collapse.
Go, your take.
Well, to start at the beginning of your question, China got 90.4% of its oil last year from Moscow. So it's not a real problem for China, even if it were to be effective, and it won't be. And the other part of that is the Central Party School, when Xi Jinping took over, the Central Party School was tasked with providing a strategic analysis that had a part of it, what to do if something like this were to occur. That is to say, if the United States became angry with China and suddenly started hurting its ability to produce for the United States or sell in the United States. That analysis told Xi Jinping that you can substitute quite adequately with domestic consumption. You now have wealth in China to the extent that you can purchase things within your own country and support to a certain extent your economy. And you can diversify. And here's how you should diversify: with other people, because they're willing to buy from you. And they've been doing that, not on the slide. They've just been doing it slowly each year. And I don't think Xi Jinping is worried at all about losing the U.S. market. So that's not really a tool in our kit bag, if you will, for fighting China short of war. The other aspect of it, I think Larry's absolutely right about this. The world is getting ready to divest itself from us.
Yeah.
We're not getting ready to divest ourselves from the world, which is Trump's mantra. That's we'll go wherever we want to go. We'll take Greenland, we'll take Panama, we'll do whatever we want to do if we have to. And I'm the one who's going to authorize it. But that's not really what the world is doing right now. The world's not shivering in its boots because Donald Trump is saying all these things. Not even Denmark and not even Panama are doing that. We're the ones who are the pariah. We're the ones who are creating the pariah status for ourselves. And as Larry said, much of the component of that creation is Israel and our support for it. And that's being doubled down on, apparently.
Yeah.
We're just going down the tube. I mean, I can't see any other reason to prophesy positive things for this administration. And sadly, for this country right now, because of the way we're being led and the direction we're pursuing.
Larry, here is what Marco Rubio said. He's asking for Iran to walk away from uranium enrichment and long-range missiles.
He of the euphoric cabinet meeting diatribe.
I don't know if they're going to change the behavior this way. I don't see anything happening between the United States and Iran. And you look at, because it's not just about the United States. You have to look at what's going on in Iran as well.
Right.
And the administration in Iran is under tremendous pressure because they're trying to negotiate with the United States. And on the other hand, you see nobody's talking about in Iran. You look at the officials. Since they have started these sort of talks and negotiations, nobody's talking about we're going to attack Israel, we're going to destroy this, that, we're going to fight the United States. They're just come down to see what's going on with the negotiations. But on the other hand, you see in the United States, you see Steve Witkoff changing the rhetoric, Marco Rubio just talking about long-range missiles, uranium enrichment. How is that going? Do you feel that they really want to negotiate? They really want to find somehow a solution? Because if something goes wrong in the way that it was in Ukraine, this could hugely change the situation, not in the region, but in the world. And the world is changing hugely as we talk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very simple question that Trump needs to answer. What's your end result? What's your objective? Tell me what is it you're trying to do? If you're wanting to get a guarantee that Iran is not going to devote any time, effort, energy, or resources to building a nuclear weapon, and that it will limit its nuclear industry to the enrichment of uranium only for peaceful purposes, if that's your goal, that's easy. That is easy. Iran is willing to do that. They've made it very clear that they're willing to do that. But if your goal is to disarm Iran in the way that we disarmed Libya, and then do regime change in Iran, no, that's not going to happen. Or at least the Iranians aren't going to be complicit in their own suicide. And that's where, Trump keeps vacillating between those two choices. One day, I could be the king of the world. I brought peace. I eliminated nukes. And then the next day, we gotta eliminate those Iranians. I mean, the lies that are perpetuated about Iran being the major sponsor of terrorism in the world, it's just objectively not true. But that facts don't matter to these people. That is what drives me crazy. That if you can sit down and have a rational conversation about, let's step back and look at who's actually, if the definition of terrorism is the use of violence against civilians for political purposes, the number one terrorist in the world right now would be Israel.
Yes.
With the United States a close second. I mean, in terms of killing civilians. Now, we come up with great excuses to justify it. Oh, but they were really bad, or, well, they were hanging around bad people. We refuse to look at ourselves objectively in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah. Cool.
No, I agree with Larry. We seem to think that the rest of the world is not watching either. Yeah. And making decisions that will be irretrievable for us. That is to say, they will no longer be our friends, maybe not even our allies. They might even be our enemies. And we're doing this. We're doing this with our imbecilic, almost insane actions from one end of the world to the other. We're supporting a monstrous operation in Gaza. And just this morning, just thumbing through Haaretz, it looks to me like they're going to have a civil war in Israel. What are we going to do when that happens? Jews are going to be killing Jews in Israel. Yeah. And this is a consequence of Netanyahu's leadership and the, Katie bar the door, torpedoes, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I'm going to destroy Hamas. You're not destroying Hamas, baby. What you're doing is creating a graveyard for people that are basically men, women, and children. Hamas is still there and still fighting you, and will be there and still fighting you if you're even a state in the future. So what are you doing? And what are you doing in Syria? And what are you doing in Lebanon? Even Aoun is becoming a little bit skeptical about what Israel is doing in Lebanon. Won't leave, not even close to honoring any kind of ceasefire or the concept of a ceasefire that I would think would be honored. This is crazy what we're doing. It's insane what we're doing all across the globe. We're not winning in Ukraine. We're not winning in Gaza or anywhere in the Levant. And we are losing big time all across the face of the globe with respect to China's moving ahead inexorably. It's insane. And this administration marks that insanity hour by hour.
Yeah.
Larry, the situation in Syria, by the way, is getting far more dangerous than it was before, and Israel is just attacking Damascus. And
yes, yeah. And using defense of the Druze as an excuse. That it looked like they might even be trying to get the new president. Yeah. One of the bombing raids.
Yeah, no, look, it's the only good news out of that is it continues to overextend Israel's capabilities.
Yes.
So, it's one thing if Israel's sitting on, great, vast manpower reserves and, ample supplies of equipment and weapons and ammunition, but they aren't. And so they're trying to fight in, are committing the genocide in Gaza. They're doing the same in the West Bank and Jenin in particular. They're into southern Lebanon, and now they're into Syria. And all of that, as they extend and expand their military operations, tell you what, that logistics tail becomes a big factor, both logistics and manpower.
Yeah.
And you put stresses and strains on that institution, and it becomes more brittle, not resilient, and it can easily break. So, this is the essence of hubris, that Israel in its arrogance will end up destroying itself.
Haaretz reported yesterday they're actually sending exclusively regulars into Gaza now. They're sending the reservists other places like Syria and Lebanon, if they'll go, because the reservists are refusing to go back online, as it were, if they go to Gaza. Yeah. They got real problems.
Yeah. And the situation, Kamal, in Ukraine is not that much different. And as time goes by, it seems that it's getting much more difficult. Here is what we had: a meeting between Zelensky and Donald Trump. Macron, or maybe Starmer, wanted to be part of that talk, which was whoever that was rejected from being part of the talk. Here is what J.D. Vance said about that.
Was in the Vatican, had this iconic image talking to Volodymyr Zelensky in those two chairs and huddled down. A much different scene than when he was last in the White House, as you well know. Yeah. Where do you see that? Is that going to come to fruition?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to give the president some credit here, because there was a really big breakthrough and hasn't gotten that much coverage. But for 3 years, these sides have fought, and each of them has said, no peace, we're going to fight until the other guy is basically knocked out. What we've seen now in the last couple of weeks is each side has put down, this is our peace proposal. The Ukrainians did it, the Russians did it. And now I think the question is to see whether we can actually find some middle ground here for these guys to bring this conflict to a close. I really don't believe that any person, of the 8 billion people in the world, I don't think anybody could have gotten this deal done other than Donald J. Trump. When I say this deal, I mean getting these guys to actually propose a peace settlement. But it's going to be up to the Russians and the Ukrainians. Now that each side knows what the other's terms for peace are, it's going to be up to them to come to an agreement and stop this brutal conflict. It's not going anywhere, Brett. It's not going to end anytime soon. And I think for the Ukrainians, yes, of course, they're angry that they were invaded, but are we going to continue to lose thousands and thousands of soldiers over a few miles of territory this or that way? I hope both of them come to their senses. And if they do, it will be because Donald J. Trump, I think, brokered one of the great peace deals of the 21st century.
Yeah. You look at Colin, you look at the way that Donald Trump and his administration are talking about the situation in Ukraine as though they are not part of the problem. They are not part of the picture. It seems all started with the Biden administration, and we know that's not right. But how did you find the latest meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky?
First, let me say that I can't believe, I know politics is politics, and I know that vice presidents have to extol their presidents and secretaries of state have to do the same thing. But the sycophancy of the remarks that J.D. Vance chooses and Marco Rubio chooses is just appalling. It's appalling. It shouldn't happen. These are professional relationships over political relationships, especially when you're talking about war. So it shouldn't happen. Now, that meeting, as I've said on other podcasts, between President Trump and Zelensky at the Vatican looked like a confessional. I suspect Zelensky was doing the confessing. And the agreement maybe was discussed there, this new, much touted agreement over minerals and such that the United States is making. I kind of agree with Anatol Lieven in his piece that he wrote yesterday, I think, where he says this could be a positive because it does show some willingness of the United States to hang around, even if it's only in an economic sense, not a security sense, not really. But it could show that, and it could be something that Putin could accept and Zelensky could accept, and we could get closer together. But I don't even I don't think I even support that interpretation. I think we failed. And I think J.D. Vance was trying to cover up that failure. We've failed to recognize ourselves that we are the perpetrators of this war. We are a belligerent in this war. Ukraine is our proxy. Zelensky, if he were to awaken to that, suddenly have an epiphany, would probably want to smack Trump in the face, not, ask him for forgiveness or anything. We are a belligerent. We are dealing with the other belligerent, Russia. Russia has won. Face that reality and get this over with. But Trump's not going to do that. He's not going to do that because it's not a face-saving politically or otherwise measure for him to do that. So I don't see that we're going to make any progress at all. I'm really sad to say I don't see that we're going to make any progress. The progress is going to be made by Russian soldiers on the battlefield. And if NATO's not careful, if the United States is not careful, we're going to wind up with a lot more we're going to wind up with a true rump Ukraine, because Russia's not going to stop. It's just going to keep going.
Yeah, but what Vance forgot, when he said, "Oh boy, the Russians came up with their peace plan." Well, hello, but Putin's had it out on the table since June 14th of 2024. They have not deviated from that, but they're in the process of augmenting it now. It's going to be more expansive, because up to this point, Russia was content to take the 4 oblasts where the referendums were conducted and the people voted to become part of Russia, those federal republics, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Lugansk. Now, Russia is poised. They're going to take Dnipropetrovsk, which is the oblast that's directly west of the Donbass. They're already in Kharkiv. They're already in Sumy, which are up on the north, sort of the northeast corner of Ukraine. And after that is Poltava. So all of a sudden, Russia could be in control of 4 more oblasts. Now, at that point, Russia can make a decision. Are we going to have a referendum, a supervised UN election? Let the people decide, do they want to be part of Ukraine or want to be part of Russia? And they're going to take Odessa. So they've given Ukraine a chance to settle this. Stop now. We'll keep these 4. You can have those 4, and we'll figure out. But you've got to come out of NATO, number one, and you have to have elections and get rid of all these anti-Russian rules on your books. But Ukraine's not going to do that. So Russia is going to continue pressing forward militarily, and there's not a damn thing we can do to stop it. The other 2 days ago, the Finns and the Norwegians and the Swedes, NATO's conducting a maritime exercise up in the Baltic Sea, and there was a Russian oil tanker that was detained. Well, Russia went out and conducted its own military exercise yesterday with both its surface fleet and submarines, and they were launching missiles out of submarines near the U.S., the NATO exercise flotilla, who they immediately like, oh, Jesus. They backed off. They went to safe harbor. And Russia sending a message. You know what? If you're gonna start attacking our ships up here in the Baltic, we're gonna take you out. And yeah, this war will expand, but Russia's looking at it as I wrote. I did this 3-part series on the history of NATO and U.S. military exercises in Ukraine. Ukraine's been a de facto member of NATO since 1995, and NATO has been embarked on a path that really accelerated under Barack Obama and then took off on steroids under Donald Trump, with the plan to militarily defeat Russia as a way to go after China, because they had to get Russia out of the way before we could attack China. That's our thinking. That's our so-called strategic thinking, and it's insane.
Neiman, that not only failed, miserably failed, just like Afghanistan and Iraq, and like Yemen. miserably failed. It forced China and Russia together.
Yeah.
Colonel, with the deal, with the mineral deal, I remember the deal between the United States and Iraq, and and how the deal between the United States and Ukraine. Nobody knows what's in the deal and how would the United States benefit from the deal, because at least from what we know so far, the vast the most the resources mostly are located in the eastern part of Ukraine under the control of Russia. And if there is something in the western part, there has to be some sort of digging and exploration and all of that. That would take a lot of time to achieve something with Ukraine. It's not even close to what they had to what has happened between the United States and Iraq. And do you really believe that the main objective was the deal, was the mineral, or it was something else? What's your speculation on that?
I think it was mostly to give a little sop to Zelensky. That's my interpretation of it, and to give a little something that might be passable with Putin, because it has no security implications to it other than that the United States will still be connected with Ukraine, not through NATO or not through any defense or security arrangement, but still connected with them. And that's all I can see that it has any utility for. And that's kind of what Anatole says. He puts a little bit more positive spin on it because of those features than I would. As I said, I don't think it's going to do a thing. I think we're headed for disaster here too, just like we are everywhere else. We've got our bloody hand right now. We're headed for disaster. And the circus that's in the White House is not doing anything but aiding and abetting that process.
Yeah, let me comment. The whole rare earth mineral thing it's basically a scam. The fact of the matter is, the United States, we have the raw rare earth minerals. They're piled up about 45 minutes north from where I am right now in Florida. A company called Mosaic. They're mining tailings, all the leftovers when they dig out mines, those piles. Those are nothing but rare earth minerals. The problem is you got to process them. And the processing is a big capital investment.
Yeah.
It's environmentally harmful. And, if someone would invest to be able to process that, to produce those rare earth minerals, and then they sell them, China, by virtue of its position as being basically the only one in the world that's got the processors set up where they can take those rare earth minerals, process them to produce the product that's actually used in ammunition, in artillery shells, in communications gear, in avionics on combat aircraft. China could simply just drop the price. I mean, so it's economically not feasible. So this is, even if they dig out rare earth minerals, where the hell are they going to process them in Ukraine? And then from, some details of the deal have come out. And after Trump's his big talk, Ukraine's going to pay us back the $350 billion. Now, there's not a thing about Ukraine paying a single dime to the United States, with the possibility of U.S. getting some economic benefit after 10 years. Okay? This agreement was all about making Donald Trump look like I accomplished something. And it's a complete fraud. So it doesn't do anything other than let Trump pretend. This is like dress up. He gets to pretend that he's a doctor, or pretend that he's a policeman. Now he gets to pretend that he's this great deal maker, and it's a complete joke. I mean, just the fact that here's Scott Bessent signing that agreement with a nobody from Ukraine. I mean, some lady who seemed like a nice lady, but who was she? She's not a player. What happened to having Zelensky sit there and sign it with you? Well, Zelensky, he won this round against Donald Trump. Absolutely. Trump didn't get all the things that he claimed he was going to get. So it's just the whole thing's a joke.
Just to add to that, Nima, Deng Xiaoping made a decision right before he left the leadership of China, and he implemented that decision. He said he was going to get 95% of the rare earth metals on the face of the earth, and he was going to have a hold over that. That didn't mean that he was going to go out and get the tons of them that are in Australia, or the tons of them, as Larry was pointing out, that are in the United States of America. What he meant was he was going to corral the pricing. And that pricing was going to mean that China would have control over it because their monopoly would make that control. Yeah. And we wouldn't want to challenge it because it's too expensive. He could do it a lot cheaper than us, in other words. I watched a show the other day, a webinar the other day, too. I didn't understand some of the definitions here, but the Naval War College put this webinar on, and they had all of their experts, both uniformed and civilian, talking about something that's very different from rare earth metals. It's called critical minerals. And there's a list of about 103 of them. And they also pointed out where each one of them went into the chain, if you will, in terms of utility and use. And the first thing that struck me as they briefed was that a lot of these things are tied to technology right now, which Pete Hegseth has this habit of saying a truism about. It's gone. 7 to 8 years is a cycle and it's gone. So you're looking at all these critical minerals that are critical right now that we're willing to expend blood over to get, or to buy Denmark to get, buy Greenland to get, or whatever. And they might be out the window in a decade or less than a decade, that you don't need them anymore because they're obsolete. You're not making that cell phone anymore, or you're not doing that kind of battery anymore. Oh, by the way, China now is the leading producer of batteries, and better batteries in the world, and a number of other things that go along with that. But this critical minerals business is a real tricky bag, and you have to be very careful about how you parse it. Is this military? Is this industrial? Is it both? Is it dual use? Is it here? Is it here? Is it there? Do we have it? Does this country have it? Do our allies have it? Like Australia, who didn't even want to get back into the business because it wasn't economically feasible to get back in the business for rare earth metals. So it's much more complicated than these idiots like Vance and Hegseth and Trump seem to want to make it. It's not that simple. Much of the world's economy is not that simple anymore.
Yeah.
What is of concern, Larry, is that, as Colonel mentioned, is the presence of the United States in the future in Ukraine with this deal between the two countries. Do you find it that of concern for Russia? Because right after signing the deal, Ukrainians were talking about they're going to receive $50 million in weapons and whatever the United States is going to send to Ukraine. But how is that going to be perceived by Russia? Is Russia happy with the situation? Does Russia believe that the United States is going to be out of Ukraine? It's not just about Donald Trump. It's about Russia, Ukraine, and the United States for the next 50, 100 years. And this is all about the presence of the United States in Ukraine, which was the main reason of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, the U.S. presence in Ukraine would be aspirational going forward. It's what we'd like to have happen. But in terms of our ability to actually make it happen, that's going to be something else, because I don't know if Russia will ever take this step. If they ask my advice, I would tell them to give one very clear message to Steve Witkoff. I'd have Putin say, Steve, here's the deal. What you're doing to us right now are acts of war. And were it not for our patience, we would have wiped out most of your cities in America. What I want from you, and to make sure that President Trump hears this clearly, is you need to end all of your military support for Ukraine. You need to end your intelligence activities on our borders. And you need to stop supplying weapons. Stop being the principal instigator of this. You back away. Because as soon as you do that, we're going to finish defeating them and protecting ourselves. But barring that, we're going to have to treat you as an enemy, and this is going to escalate. Now they don't want to escalate because Putin and company, they know the cost of war, but the United States is not to be trusted in this. I'm sad to say, we are the biggest imperialist instigator right now in the world, and our intent is not to find a way that we can peacefully coexist with Russia, China, and Iran. We want to destroy all three, and then North Korea too. And those countries have come to the realization, you know what, that we better hang together, because the United States is not going to stop. The only thing that's going to stop us is an economic collapse here or a major military defeat. When that's what it's going to take to wake us up. Until that happens, the United States imperial aggressiveness is going to continue, I think.
Cole, Lavrov said when he was talking with the Brazilian newspaper, he said that Russia will not sacrifice its partners for the benefit of a better relationship with the United States. Do you think that what's going on between the United States and Russia would influence the situation with China, or maybe with Iran, or the United States is still able to get something out of Ukraine, out of the conflict in Ukraine, something positive in terms of making a better relationship between the United States and Russia?
I think the only thing the United States is going to get out of the situation in Ukraine is a bloody nose and a defeat under Trump, and maybe under any American president, because we just don't seem to understand the dilemma we put ourselves in. Not only have we forced Russia and China together, we have forced Russia, China, and Iran together. We have forced the BRICS to go much faster in terms of their cohesiveness and their actions. Sergei Lavrov, at the end of the Rio de Janeiro meeting of BRICS foreign ministers and such, made some statements to that effect. They were clouded and coded, but as a good diplomat will do. But the statement said, in essence, we're the future, not that behemoth up there. That behemoth up there is committing suicide. We're the future. And they're trying to do a deal with that behemoth that's committing suicide without bringing the world into a situation of committing suicide. And that's an arduous task, but they're hard at it. But they're not going to give up the things they've won through blood and treasure in Ukraine, most important of which is an assurance of Russia's security. That's what it was all about. That's what the special military operation was all about. So we're sort of caught on that dilemma right now, that Russia's got sense and we don't. And Russia's trying to use that sense to nonetheless deal with us. That's tough.
Yeah.
And I don't predict the outcome.
Larry, your take. How do you find it? How do you see Donald Trump, which was, everybody remembers that he said that he's going to put an end in 24 hours. Right now, it doesn't seem that Europe is helping the United States in the strategy that Donald Trump had before coming to power. And at least we know that Donald Trump is getting closer to the European strategy toward Russia. It's not the Trump administration convincing Europe or forcing Europe to do something in Ukraine. How do you find Europe getting stronger in their way, in their sort of strategy toward Russia than the United States? Because I'm talking about the way that they have influenced the Trump administration, by the way, in my opinion.
The fact that you could use the phrase Europe getting stronger with a straight face. Okay, even you laughed, all right? You knew it was ridiculous. You know, what Trump has genuinely accomplished with respect to foreign policy in his first 100 days is he has completely, totally alienated Europe. And, you know, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think the Europeans are a group of disgraceful colonialists anyway, have been responsible for raping so much of the world that they're getting a little bit of karma, a little bit of payback is what they're due. But the notion that NATO is now more united than ever before, nonsense. So, Trump has managed to accomplish that. The Europeans actually are going to do everything they can to try to sabotage us going forward. And yet Europe is not in a position, militarily, they're a joke. Economically, they're in trouble. They're not sitting on some vast store of natural resources that can, and plus the human capital in these countries has become just a joke as well. So, Russia's looking out and realizing that Europe is a limited military threat, and they're an annoyance, more like a yappy little dog that is vicious but has no teeth. The situation in Ukraine, though, Russia's it's gonna be a military conquest. That's how it's going to end. We don't want to accept that. And the West is going to do everything they can to try to sabotage it. In the process of sabotaging it, run the risk of putting themselves in the crosshairs. Right now, I think it's, I don't know how many thousands of Poles have died, but, I've heard one number like 10,000. Polish soldiers mercenaries have been killed so far in the last 3.5 years of war in Ukraine. Colombian mercenaries have really taken a big hit. British mercenaries as well. And, Russia's going to give them a chance. Stay out or get killed. It's that simple. So Donald Trump's failure to appreciate
it seems that we've lost Larry. Colonel, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Colonel, what Larry was mentioning, it's so important.
We're back.
Yeah, you're back, Larry. Yeah. It seems that something happened with your connection, Larry.
I have
We
no
were
idea.
online, yeah. And
The NSA is playing with us.
Yeah,
It's the NSA.
I don't rule that out at all.
Colin, it's so amazing to me when you look at the conflicts that the United States foreign policy is confronting or is facing or is trying to solve. You look at China and the way that they're behaving. They're improving the relationship between China and Russia, between China and Iran. They're doing nothing and to confront the United States. And you see that the leadership in Iran is getting closer to China. The leadership in Russia is getting closer to China. Do you think that is there anybody in the establishment in the United States to evaluate that, to see the bigger picture, to see what's going on in terms of these sort of strategic moves that are happening?
No, not even in the uniformed leadership of the military, which is now so enamored of Lockheed Martin and other big contractors that all it can think about is its 10 to 12 years of retirement at $1 million a year as an advisory board member or whatever. Brain dead Pentagon is what we got. So the answer to your question is no. Now, there are some people out there. And by the way, your business about China and maybe that relationship not being anything but a thorn in our side too is emphasized more and more by the new president in Taiwan, who looks a lot like Chen Shui-bian now, who is CSB, I'll call him. I'm making a mess of the Chinese. The whole time Colin Powell was Secretary of State, he would dispatch people to Taipei on a weekly basis, plus energize our ambassador there. Couldn't be called an ambassador, but Doug Powell was our man on the island to disabuse them of what Cheney and Rumsfeld had told them. That is, go ahead with your referendum for independence. We want to beard the lion in its den, Well, this guy now is doing the same thing again, except he's not pushing the envelope across that Chinese red line of independence for Taiwan, but he's doing everything else that's possible. Trump needs to rein him in, just as Bush finally, on Powell's advice, reined in CSB. But he's not even looking at it, as far as I can tell. His national security advisor wasn't even looking at it. So we're looking at a situation there where China is going to be more and more prompted to cross that red line, to take that as a red line and to move on Taiwan. Just to add to the perfidy and the, what shall I say, the incapacity of this circus to manage anything at all. So my answer to your question with regard to can we survive this mess? Can we get out of this mess? No. And we're even adding to it by the fact that that's going on. We have forced Russia and China together. We've forced Russia, China, and Iran together. We're forcing the BRICS to be more competitive and more accelerate their movement. They will be replacing the dollar within the next 2 decades. I can guarantee you that. And we're looking at, as John Mearsheimer says, the inevitability of a war with China. This is great. Empire's trucking along on all 8 cylinders.
Yeah.
Larry, you think that Donald Trump, that I remember you when Donald Trump was, he announced that he's going to be the candidate of the United States in the presidential election. We were so optimistic about him and his attitude. I remember we talked a lot about that. Do you see that sort of hope that we had in Donald Trump and his administration is fading away?
Yes. No. I think he's done. I don't think he can salvage this now. I think he's on an inevitable path of collapse. And China is going to be the undoing for him, because they're convinced themselves that we can compel China to kowtow to us because they need us so much economically. And, the Chinese are more prepared to deal with this than we are. If for no other reason, their political system is that Xi Jinping is not going to be facing midterm elections next year, where the Chinese people get to vote whether they think he's doing a great job or not. Even if the Chinese people hate him and think he's doing a lousy job, he's got a security state that can, stop them and stop the opposition. Donald Trump doesn't have that here in the United States, even though he might like to try to create it. And, the Republicans are going to get absolutely crushed if this continues. I don't think it's necessarily there will be a big flow to the Democrats per se, but the chaos of people just being angry at what Trump has produced in terms of his policies. The Chinese are not going to surrender, and we're going to have major supply disruptions in this country. And there are already signs that the economy is slowing across the board. And once recession kicks in, then the financial problems that we face are going to be exacerbated. And all the while, we've been pumping out this money into Israel and into Ukraine. Now, I think the bleeding on Ukraine will stop just out of necessity, as the Ukrainian, it's very likely they could be facing defeat this summer. Their own, Budanov, their head of intelligence, was predicting such, that by June, Ukraine's ability to fight will be over. So we'll see. But, Trump, man, he had a historic opportunity to remake the world in terms of genuinely secure peace with Russia, secure peace with China, secure peace with Iran, and bring Israel to heel, to stop its murder of the Palestinians. Instead, he's managed to find a way to do the exact opposite.
Colin, it's not just about us talking about it. You look at the behavior of Russia. If you remember, Russia said they're not going to talk with Zelensky and his administration because they don't recognize Zelensky as the official president of Ukraine, but they're changing their rhetoric. They they want to talk with Zelensky because they see, in my opinion, that Donald Trump is incapable of doing something with Zelensky. They see that maybe Europe has much more influence on Zelensky than Donald Trump has. And that's why they're changing their attitude towards Zelensky. Do you think that's the main reason, or something beyond that, that Russia has changed its mind towards Zelensky?
Whom are you speaking about? Ursula von der Leyen, Merz, Friedrich Merz, Starmer, Macron, dead men, women walking.
Yeah.
I don't understand whom you're talking about, because I don't see any potency there whatsoever. I read an article last night by a guy from Macalester College, Latham, I think is his name, Professor Latham. He's calling for a concert of power, post-Napoleon. Much the same thing that I've talked about from time to time, a world of comedy, collaboration, and cooperation, which is essentially what Wang Yi and increasingly Sergei Lavrov talks about too, like he did in Rio de Janeiro. That's the future. That's the future. But we're the impediment to that future. We are the impediment. And Europe, to a certain extent, our lackeys, whether they're breaking apart and hating us or not, they're our lackeys, they're disciples. They're working on the same plan. I don't know how you have a concert of Europe when there are no instruments and no conductor. But that's what we ought to be aiming for. That's what I think Russia and China would be willing to aim for. That's what we ought to be doing for no other reason, if you will, than the fact that we can't beat the climate crisis nor deal with nuclear weapons without that kind of consortium. There's no way we're going to do it. There's no way we're going to survive without that kind of consortium. And yet, van der Leyen and her crew and all the others who are, as I said, not representing their people. And by the way, their people are demographically disappearing, just like we are. I take that into consideration too. The Army can't even think about the future in terms of recruiting. It's so abysmal now, but the cadre of those to be recruited is going to go down by 15 to 16% because of demographics. So their pool is going to be even smaller. The empire is inalterably and utterly broken, and Donald Trump is presiding over it. If you ask me the question now, this moment, what do I think is Donald Trump's strategic objective? If I had the audacity to suggest he had one, I would say the destruction of the American Republic.
Larry, we know that Zelensky is attacking Crimea. Ukrainian drones are attacking Crimea. And the question I asked Colin, it was if Russia is just getting nowhere with Donald Trump talking with Zelensky. That's why they have decided to change their attitude and talk directly with Zelensky. And if Zelensky would be capable of reaching a deal with Russia or making some sort of agreement if they talk directly.
Well, Russia's always, I think it's wrong to think that Russia has shifted its position, of it. They weren't willing to talk to Zelensky, but now they are. Hell, they were willing to talk to the Ukrainians back in February of 2022, which is, the reason Russia launched the operation, that special military operation, the way it did, was to compel Ukraine to come to the negotiating table. And it achieved that objective. And they actually had, Sergei Lavrov told me personally 8 weeks ago that it was the Ukrainians who brought the paper into say, okay, here's the outlines of the deal, which included protecting the Russian speakers in the Donbass and a reduction in Ukraine's military force. And Russia said, great, they're going to sign off on it. There were still details to work out. But it was the United States that came in and told Zelensky via Boris Johnson, don't do it. So they stopped there. September of 2022, who issues the edict that it's illegal to talk to the Russians? Zelensky. It's not the Russians. So, Russia's willing to talk to them, but what Russia's going to say to them is just like what the Soviet generals said to von Paulus at Stalingrad. This is where you guys stack your arms. This is where you assemble what's left of your soldiers. They're going to dictate terms of surrender. That's how this is going to end. It's not like they've got a disagreement over child custody, and each parent has a legitimate claim to the child. No. Ukraine no longer has a legitimate claim. The Russians recognize that the Nazi ideology that undergirds the society and the celebration of criminals like Bandera, that's going to be eradicated. And one of the ways you eradicate that is it's made illegal, and people that propound those kinds of ideas and thoughts, they're going to be put in prison. Russia's not playing around with this, and the West assumes that they are, sadly.
Colonel, one part of the problem in Ukraine would be the security part, which is when you look at the Chechnya and Dagestan, you see the radicalism and jihadists, and Russia together with Iran, they could achieve something in terms of avoiding the threat coming from Daesh, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of that. But it seems that what's going on in Ukraine, as Peskov mentioned, that the Ukrainian army is not totally under the control of Kiev. This has something to say about the security of Russia, because if the government, if the Zelensky administration is not in full control of the army, who's in control of that? And is that going to be a new sort of jihadists, radicals that they're going to live on Russia's border for the next, 20 years, 50 years that Russia has to deal with?
I fear greatly that will be the case, and I'm sure Putin does too. I don't think for a moment that we're miraculously a ceasefire peace agreement to materialize and everybody's happy with it for 24 hours, that Russia would violate it. Ukraine would violate it all along the line of contact, as it were. They would violate it all the time, every day, 24/7. That's the kind of people live there, at least in some respects. I'm not trying to condemn all Ukrainians, but I had to deal with this country from 2002 to 2005. Corruption is the name of the game in Ukraine, and monopoly is the name of the game. Even Yulia Tymoshenko had a telecommunications monopoly. When she came in, I thought, oh, a breath of fresh air, a woman. She was worse than the guy who preceded her. They're that way. So I would be really worried if I were Putin about the policing, as it were, of whatever agreement takes place. I'm not going to violate it, but they will.
Yeah.
Larry, just to wrap up this session, do you have something to say about the security and the case of Ukrainian army being somehow divided?
Well, you go back and look at the United States embarked, with benefit of hindsight, the United States embarked on a sort of a comprehensive plan to try to destabilize and destroy Russia. One of the legs of that attack was promoting the Islamic extremists in Chechnya. Yeah. They carried out a 10-year war against Russia. Russia defeated them. Russia took some enormous casualties during that period. You remember the assault that took place on a school. They killed like 600, kids and parents. It was just horrific. But Russia defeated them, and now today, with the Chechen battalions and divisions that fill the Russian army, and Abdi Aladinov is a prime example where their love for Mother Russia supersedes their love for Allah. And I don't know how the Russians have managed to pull this off, but they know what it's like to have to fight an internal war. Now you're correct that there are those radicals in Dagestan and Chechnya, and those have made their ways into the radical Sunni movements. But Russia has proven that it could deal with that threat. And in a way that we've never proven. So it's, I think it's a strategic consideration. Russia is, they've really, to me, they provide an example of what the United States could be, because they didn't waste trillions of dollars in overseas wars. Their money was devoted to rebuilding Russia from within, from the disaster that it was in 1999. And Putin deserves the credit for that, and I think that's generally appreciated in Russia. That Putin, instead of embroiling them in unnecessary wars, rebuilt the society. But this war in Ukraine was not an unnecessary war. This is an existential threat to Russia, because the plan of NATO all along has been to destroy Russia. I don't know if you caught, the two Moscow pranksters, Vovan and Lexus.
Yeah.
So they got this guy, Paul Massaro, who's, he's a top U.S. guy on at the OSCE. And he admits in there, our plan, we've got to defeat Russia so we can go after China. That was what Wes Mitchell, Aaron Wes Mitchell wrote in his paper that was published in the National Interest in August 2021, but had been submitted to the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessments in 2020. I mean, this has been genuinely the plan of the United States. They view Russia as something we got to destroy, we got to break it up, and then we can go after the real enemy, which is China. And the fact that there are people in the United States that are actually thinking this way and promoting policies to that extent is they're going to walk us into an ambush, and we're going to get blown up. That's what's going to happen.
Colonel, here is what Larry was talking about.
Let me just say one
Go
thing.
ahead.
I like what Larry said about Russia's learning how to deal with the Islamic terrorists. We have too. We support, fund, and cooperate with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Here is the segment that Larry was talking about.
China. I mean, we've been in this 15-year pivot to Asia, where we never actually make it to Asia, because Russia won't let us. And the way to do it is to defeat Russia. But unfortunately, it's really hard for people to imagine that for whatever reason.
Yeah, this is the tragedy. He feels that the way they did is to defeat Russia and then go after China.
If you know a map, just a map, and you know what 11 time zones means, and you know the distance between, let's just take the border of Ukraine and Vladivostok. If you know the distance between now the southern portion of what is Russia to the Arctic, that's such a preposterous statement. Yeah. Just geography alone screams at you that you're nuts. Not to even mention the Russian people, who have shown throughout their history a enormous resilience to invasion.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colonel and Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
It's always a delight to be with Colonel Wilkerson.
Yeah.
Likewise. Likewise. I don't know about you though, Neiman.
Yeah.
I love it. Take care.
Thanks so much.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.